The best homeowners associations and the best boards are the boards that are functioning as a team, as opposed to opposing political parties.
Most people are not equipped to understand the seemingly endless facets of an HOA. That's why we're here, to help you become uncommonly prepared to serve your HOA. Whether you're a board member or a manager, join us in the Uncommon Area.
Welcome to the Uncommon Area. I am Matthew Holbrook, and this episode is all about the topic of board member blunders. And joining me to talk about this subject is Kate Kilanowski of Cagle Pugh. Appreciate you being here, part of this episode, Kate.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we get to be here with a live audience at the Swexan Hotel, and it's a great setting. And yeah, we're going to be talking about what are the mistakes that we've seen board members make. And I have a lot of specific ideas I want to ask you. We've both been to a lot of board meetings. We've been to a lot of different events relating to HOAs. We've seen a lot over the years. But just in a general sense, what would you think of, what comes to mind when you think about mistakes that board members make?
Yeah, so I have been representing HOAs for almost 20 years now. And I will say that the lens that I look through is that, you know, I get involved when the HOA has questions or disputes, and that's when they call me. It's not when things are going great. Right. So my lens almost is board blunders exclusively. Some of the things that I see on the lower level at your typical HOA meeting is when a board has not read the governing documents and understood them fully. Maybe they thought they understood them, but they haven't understood them. And they will start making assumptions about their authorities as an HOA in general. Especially here in Texas, right? If you have a residential subdivision association, your authorities are going to be limited to pretty much what's in your governing documents themselves. There are not a lot of inherent authorities. Because we're an HOA, we therefore have the inherent authority to go onto a person's property and do a force mow or something like that, do work in their unit without talking with them first. So I see those kinds of blunders on the very lower level. And then there are the higher ones of, with great, you know, boards have great intentions. A lot of times they'll have great intentions and they will say things like, look, I have a fill in the blank legal duty to you as a homeowner, which is not legally true or accurate. But now that homeowner has it in their head, you, board member, owe me this legal duty, and they try to hold it to them, even though that duty never existed in the first place. I'm just thinking of so many.
Yeah, well, let's break down what you've got so far. So governing documents. Yeah. A homeowners association is governed primarily by their CC&Rs, by their bylaws. CC&Rs, the covenants, conditions, and restrictions. Mm-hmm. That's essentially a contract between the homeowners and the association. And so, first of all, you're commenting that a lot of board members don't even know what's in their CC&Rs or in their bylaws, and they may overextend their authority because they're going beyond that. Within that, we talk about CC&Rs being a contract. This is a contractual relationship between homeowners and the association. The association is a corporation. One of the things that comes to mind, and we'll come to some of the other things that you brought up, but one of the things that comes to mind for me is an association is both a corporation and a community, a corporation and a neighborhood. It's a community of people. And I think that board members make mistakes in leaning too far one way or the other. Either they fall all the way on the side of hey, we're a corporation, we have to follow all these rules and laws and do these things. But on the side of and they might miss that They have actual neighbors and people in a community they want to interact with in that way. Or there's others that just say, hey, we're a community, we're a neighborhood, and they lean all the way to that side and they ignore their legal responsibilities. Do you see the same kinds of issues?
Yes, we do all the time, because it's a delicate balance, because as a board, you want to make sure you comply with the legal duties you do have, right? Like a duty of care to the association or a duty of loyalty to the association. But you also want to make the homeowners happy. There are some board members that feel that they represent, like them as a person, not necessarily as a member on the board, represent the interests of the owners who might not be happy with what the association is doing. The board can lean too hard into, we need to follow, cross every T and dot every I, and this is the policy we have. Like, for example, we talked about collections. We've talked about this with collections before, where you have a collections policy and that's great and you want to follow it. But maybe there are some times that you need to have some flexibility with that policy in order to address people's human needs in your neighborhood or your association. Talk to your neighbor about what's happening with respect to their collections matter, because they might want to fix it, right? I always say, I go to court quite a bit and I'll tell judges or whoever it is, the HOA is not in the business of owning properties. They don't want to own people's units or own their houses, but they are a corporation that needs money to operate. And almost all associations' sole source of revenue is the assessments themselves, unless you have an association like one I lived in that rented out a billboard on the side of the building. They got rental, they got money from that, but it needs money to operate, and you buy into it and you need to pay your dues. That being said, there are some times you need to hear the owner out.
Yeah. So you're looking at how do you balance those? You have a contractual obligation to all of the homeowners to collect money from one homeowner,
right,
individually, and that applies to everybody. On the other hand, you have people that have very real life realities that they have to navigate. So if a board is listening to a homeowner that comes to them and says, hey, I've had this go on in my life, and I'm looking for some leniency from the board on a particular issue. And let's say the board is listening to this homeowner and they say, you know what, this is a valid concern. We want to be flexible in this. What are some of the things that a board should think through so that they don't fall into a trap and make a big mistake in allowing maybe some leniency that they haven't previously done?
Well, if they haven't done it already, they need to consider whether or not there are laws that require the association to offer a payment plan or work with them on a payment plan. And so that's a great way to approach it. Then, I mean, these things are confidential matters. You don't go out and tell the rest of the neighborhood, hey, we're going ahead and we're sending your neighbor demand letters to pay their HOA dues. So you can work with them and set up meetings with them and work it out. And I do think, as long as you're not doing it all the time and running the risk of waiving or abandoning certain deed restrictions, you should be okay. And I also look at everything through the lens of, is this going to end up on the newspaper, right? You don't want to go really hard and start demanding and threatening foreclosure on somebody who only owes, a couple $100 in attorney's fees, because it could end up on the newspaper. And I have seen it end up on the newspaper. So it's been a long time since I've seen one of those cases, because we do not do that, but they used to happen. Yeah,
it is very sellable from a media standpoint to take an individual homeowner who is theoretically being abused by an association and to make that into a story. And so you do want to run from that. But also my experience is a lot of board members, they just want to do the right thing by the association or the corporation, and they want to do the right thing by the individual homeowners. I think oftentimes when you're making those exceptions, you're looking at how do we document this as to what's our rationale in this particular situation? What are the facts that we're considering, and document that. And then what you end up with is very rarely do you have two cases that are exactly the same.
Right.
And so you can treat those as one-off situations. Yeah. You mentioned the concern about things ending up in the news or being blown up. We've talked about what about those things that get blown up in court? Yeah. And one of those aspects relates to email communication. between board members, between management and the board, between board members and homeowners. Where do you see boards making mistakes with email?
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes is that dance like no one's watching, but email like you're reading it out loud in a courtroom, right? I've seen some things go very sideways because of a single email that was sent. As we all know, tone gets lost in an email sometimes. You might intend for something to be very nice, but it could come across very terse and the other person can interpret it the wrong way. But those are not necessarily always the fun stories. The fun stories are when you're in the middle of a lawsuit and all the board members have to produce their emails about, about something. And a long, long time ago, I was going through doc review of thousands of pages of emails, and there was a board member and a committee member who happened to be married, and the topic of the email went from HOA matters to personal matters that were really steamy. And I felt for that couple. I was like, I don't even know if they know they produced. I mean, I guess they had to produce it in this lawsuit, but it was an HOA thing, and then I guess they just didn't think that it would ever end up being read by, 20 attorneys about why this contract was entered into in the first place, But, and then I've had other, times where one board member, no homeowner made a request and the board was happy to accommodate this person's specific request. But there was one board member who didn't like the guy that made the request. And he wrote in an email back really quickly within first 5 minutes, wrote, "That sounds like a you problem." And the board still made the accommodation that the homeowner had asked for, but that homeowner was so mad at that board member who said, "This sounds like a you problem," that they went ahead and filed a HUD complaint and cost the association thousands of dollars because of one email that wasn't even implemented. The owner got everything that they wanted, but they were so mad that this board member responded that way in an email, and he was ready. This homeowner was ready to take it to a judge to show everybody, look at what a jerk my my one board member is. So we ended up getting it resolved, and the complaint was dismissed and everything, but not before the association had to hire counsel.
Yeah. So you've raised a couple of issues here when it comes to email. One, you have to be aware of even your own personal reputation. If you're on a board of directors, and I don't care if you're on the board of directors of a homeowners association or of a private corporation or of a multinational Fortune 500 corporation, anything that you put in email with respect to the business of that entity could ultimately become very public. I'm familiar with a case where ultimately the result of it resulted in a pretty important decision that the case law would affect how many homeowners associations function going forward. And in the process of that lawsuit, there were emails between board members and homeowners, and the board members, while they ultimately won the case, they were behaving very badly towards the homeowner. And the way that they were communicating to the homeowner, what they were saying about the homeowner, to each other, all of this is blown up in court. And so while the board members ultimately won the lawsuit, they lost in the court of public opinion as far as everybody was looking at this saying, those guys are jerks. And so from a personal standpoint, and this is something that it made the news, it's referenced regularly, and it's a situation, so their personal integrity was put at risk because of this lawsuit.
And I feel for that because it's not just boards that behave badly. Homeowners for sure behave badly and send horrible emails to board members, to councils. I've been on the receiving end. And some people's first intuition is, first reaction is they're like, well, the association needs to know how this person is treating us. And I have to do everything to make sure that the board does not start saying this is how this homeowner has been acting. They've been acting erratically, aggressively, because when you start to engage, it only fans the flames and escalates the already contentious situation. I have found. Sure, there's a time where you have a meeting meeting or a neighborhood meeting, and you give that person the microphone so everybody can hear just how that person is, is engaging with the board. And that's why we're not able to move the ball forward and get things done with respect to that person's request. But I've seen it. I've been on the receiving ends of emails that are harassing, threatening. I had a judge one time look at an email that was sent to me, and he said, "Well, this is a terroristic threat." And I was like,
Wow.
"Yeah, it is. What are we going to do about this?" And so, yeah, I get it. It can get you worked up, but you have to step back, take a deep breath, and think, how do I respond? Should I respond? And I know the reaction is very much that everybody wants to respond immediately, but I don't think that responding immediately is always the best way to proceed. You got to take a deep breath, and you got to think this is going to end up in an email chain somewhere. It could be blown up. I could say something that my first reaction is emotional instead of thought through. So,
yeah, I think when it comes to email, which obviously you're not going to get away from that. There's email communication is just part of how business gets done. But there does have to be an awareness of the risks associated with what you put in writing in that regard. And email becomes very easy to do things without thinking that through. I was just thinking as you were talking, the number of governing entities that do affect a homeowners association are actually pretty broad. You have certain civil code that might apply, but you have housing laws, you have Americans with Disabilities Act, you have discrimination types of laws that have to be considered. And when you put things in an email, you could be saying something all totally right, but you could have that one phrase or that one sentence that might open the door for a certain amount of liability to come in from one of these angles that you're not even considering. Mm-hmm. And so I think that maybe we would agree that our counsel on this would be when you're putting something in email, have awareness that it could end up becoming much more broadly known, every single email. Yeah. And secondly, have consideration to keep things pretty factual, pretty direct, and keep the emotion out of the emails. Yeah. And be careful even about the opinions. You can give an opinion maybe on, I like the color of that paint, but certainly opinions about other people might be where you would want to have great care.
Yeah, I like the color of that paint, but I don't like the people who are putting it up. No, you don't want to say that. But again, Texas owners have a right to inspect the books and records of the association, so they will maybe be able to see this. And I have to think too, when I'm emailing, and I talk to my boards about this in advance. I'm like, look, when I'm emailing you, I'm trying to be as professional as possible. Yes. But also I'm fully aware that you might not be on the board anymore. And that person that's kicking and screaming right now may end up on the board. Yep. And be the person that I'm communicating with going forward. And they now have our emails going back and forth kind of thing. So
yeah, absolutely. When we talk about personalities, this is maybe a little bit more of a nuanced point where I see boards kind of go off the rails. But in our world today, it's the aggressive communication, we'll say, whether it be verbally or in writing, is just escalating. And add that to, we are right now the day before a national election, but homeowners associations somehow have become political to the degree to where it's hard to tell the difference in some cases between the politics of an association and a national presidential election. And I guess where I'm going with this is that the best homeowners associations and the best boards are the boards that are functioning as a team as opposed to opposing political parties. And so we see that on homeowners association boards where there are people that say, hey, I'm representing my constituency. And then they puts them at odds with somebody else who's representing a separate constituency, rather than we're all on the same team trying to help things be better for our community as a whole. How would you respond to a board member that says, hey, I have an obligation to represent the constituency that elected me?
Yeah, absolutely.
I've heard that language, by the way.
Yes, I know. Me too. And I have had that situation, and I have developed a very calm professional response, because it's usually, somebody who I'll just give an example, annual meeting, and a person is running for the board, and they'll get up and they'll tell the whole association, I'm running for the board because I represent all of you who want to, disband the HOA or dissolve the HOA. And I'll have to remind them that if they become a member of the board, they have a duty of care and duty of loyalty to the association itself as a corporate entity. It's not to the individual owners when you're dealing with a residential subdivision association. There are some nuances in TUCA to be aware of, but generally speaking, it is not, I don't have an individual fiduciary duty to that individual homeowner to look out for their financial best interest. Like I said, you don't want to start offering that as well, because it can get very confusing when you don't have that duty. But the duties are to the association and to do what you believe is in the best interest of the association as a whole. And what's in the best interest in the association as a whole depends on your particular association and your goals. And being respectful and polite and listening, I think goes a huge way. I think most people just want to be heard.
I think it's rare to find homeowners association boards that think of themselves specifically as a team. But if you think of any organization that's well-run, well-functioning, the leadership of that organization, whether it be an executive group or a board of directors, they're functioning in some way as a team as opposed to political parties. I've recommended to a lot of boards Patrick Lencioni's book, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. I think it's a very helpful resource. And the reason I bring this up is when we talk about teams, it doesn't mean everybody agrees. In fact, the best teams have people that don't agree. And Lencioni makes the point that when you have an absence of trust, you can't have healthy conflict. And that's what you want. You want healthy conflict where you can have disagreement, but you're pushing each other towards the same goal because there's a trust basis. So my comment on one side would be, I think where a lot of associations, boards make mistakes is that they're functioning politically as opposed to as a team, and they're not looking for ways as a team to build trust with each other and letting that trust develop into a place where they can have healthy conflict. And then Lencioni goes on that healthy conflict leads to commitment, and then commitment leads to accountability, and accountability to an attention to results. So
some of the hardest situations I've seen is when one person gets on the board and starts attacking the other board members in emails, and it shuts everything down.
When it becomes personalized.
It becomes personalized. Nobody wants to deal with that board member, and then the association as a whole suffers because you can't get anything done.
Yeah. So along those lines, a lot of things happen in a homeowners association board meeting. I've only one time ever had to wonder if I tip this table over, is it bulletproof? But I'm sure you've been in some meetings that have been escalated a little bit. But sometimes homeowners or even board members will say, hey, we should record these board meetings. What are your thoughts?
No.
Should an association record their board meetings?
I don't think that associations should record board meetings. I just think that for a number of reasons. One, you're in a condo association, unless your governing documents state otherwise, you don't even have to give notice that you're having a board meeting. But until an owner, of course, requests it first. But I think when the cameras are on, I know when the cameras are on, what are we talking about? I think when the cameras are on, people lock up a little bit and they get less candid, and you talked about trust, right? They get less candid and they're less willing to talk about things openly. And, they're concerned for litigation purposes for, the right or wrong reasons. Sometimes it does end up in litigation. And then, I had an association that was recording their town halls, which were intended to be very casual, but they ended up going on for hours. And we had a lawsuit, and the other side directed the court to their YouTube page that had all these town halls, and I had to review like 25 hours of town hall meetings to decide what was important and what was relevant and what wasn't. But I'm against it for a number of reasons. I don't think there's any good that comes from it, except I do understand that people want to be able to see what happened at the board meeting, but you can always go to the board meeting and find out yourself.
So that raises a couple of issues. But first, if somebody wants to know what happened in a board meeting, the minutes should capture that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So talk for a minute. What would a good board want to be captured in their minutes of their board meetings?
Any votes or actions that occurred, anything that they approved, need to be written down in their meeting minutes for sure. So you have memorialization of this contract was approved, this action was approved, we voted on it this way, that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're not getting into in the minutes, he said this, she said this, and this whole dialogue, which, and the reason you don't put that in the minutes is the same reason you don't want it recorded, because all of that could potentially get picked apart if there was anything that would end up in court. And what you really want is you want homeowners to be able to know what happened in the meeting as far as what are the decisions that were made, what actually came out of that meeting, and that's what you want recorded. And you don't want to be putting a whole lot of other information in there that just opens the door for things to be taken out of context or to be drawn out and for somebody to zero in on a particular point. And you're right, when you're in a meeting and the cameras are on, it's going to make you think twice before everything that you say. And we're right now making a recording of something. Cameras are on us. We're both thinking through, what am I saying? How is this going to come out? Yeah. And it does limit your ability to speak maybe as freely as you might want to when there is a topic on the table that you might have to work a little bit to figure out how to say what you want to say, but you're not quite sure how to get it out, and then you end up not saying anything at all when maybe you could have ultimately made a point, but you're afraid of how it's going to look when it's being recorded. So,
absolutely, 100%.
Legal reasons and just even from relational and dialogue reasons, not a great idea to record.
Yeah, I don't.
But from a board meeting minutes standpoint, it would be a good idea to record decisions. You should do that, absolutely. And votes. But fair to say, really not much more than that, right?
Yeah, I think that's all you need.
Shifting gears for just a minute, we just have a few more minutes left in this episode. I see, and this might be a little self-serving, but I see boards that expect their managers to know everything. And I mean that from the standpoint of, I've seen boards where they expect their manager to know everything that there is to know in the world. And I might be exaggerating a little bit, but what is from a healthy standpoint, what should a board be expecting of what a manager would know and how a manager might be able to guide them?
Oh, goodness. Okay. I was thinking more of what a manager doesn't do or should not do. But you talk about, managers are not they're not experts in the entire world, right? I always think of the sayings of, if you want to have surgery on your hand, you don't go to a foot doctor. Like, you go to very specialized people for very specialized things, especially when you've got a high rise, you need certain construction experts, right? And your manager may or may not be a construction expert. My guess is probably not. Your manager is probably not an engineer. Your manager is probably not an attorney, but they know all of these things, and they are usually aware of all the things that go on in your condo association or your homeowners association. They're aware of usually they're up to speed on the law, but they're not lawyers because the law changes every 2 years. I have my visual of this is my partner wrote the Texas HOA law manual, which is like 800 and something pages.
You have that memorized, right?
I do. Yeah, I have that absolutely memorized, every word.
So does every manager in Texas.
Every manager in Texas probably has a copy of that book.
Yeah.
So, I think that to expect a manager to know everything about every law is asking entirely too much. Managers act at the direction of the board. And if you tell a manager to do something, they might say, well, maybe that's not a good idea. But I'm thinking they're not going to say, well, it's not a good idea because Section 209 of the Texas Property Code says that that's not enough notice for that particular meeting that you're trying to send out. They generally know the answer to that question, by the way, but I wouldn't say they are obligated to know the answer to that question. But I do think, managers are the brain of the association. They know all the things, all the people, all of the issues, nuances. Okay, you need a reserve study. You need to make sure that you have your annual meeting. They know your documents backwards and forwards for the most part. And
yeah, your manager is going to know the specifics of the association. They're going to know the people in the association, and they're going to be, a good manager is going to be a generalist. They're going to know something about the law. They're going to know something about plumbing. They're going to know something about asphalt. They're going to know something about insurance. They're going to know something about financial statements. But all of those things have experts in their own field.
Yes.
And where I see boards maybe try to shortcut things, they don't want to pay for the expert. So they put the expectation on the manager that the manager is going to be the expert in all of these different things. And the reality is there's nobody that's going to know everything that there is to know, and certainly not your manager. And so a good manager, again, should be somebody who knows enough to be able to direct boards to, hey, we need to bring in somebody who has an expertise in this field, and let's draw on the value of that.
Yeah, managers spend tons of time learning and participating and getting certifications for a reason. To be aware of all of the topics and issues that they need to be aware of, and the kinds of vendors that the association and the board needs to consider and vet, and how many. And then they usually participate in community association functions that introduce you to other people who are also specialized in HOA issues and HOA topics, landscaping, engineering, pools, all of the kind of highly specialized things.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the last thing I would touch on for this episode is I have concerns about boards that are making mistakes because they are too short-sighted. They're looking for how do we address things right now, as opposed to what are going to be the impacts that are going to be coming years down the road. And oftentimes it's because you have homeowners who are yelling and making a lot of noise right now. But speak to what you've seen in that, and how should boards be sorting out kind of the right now versus the long term, and how do they balance those types of things?
Well, the easy target to answer that question, of course, is reserve studies and special assessments. And it is very easy to keep the assessments down and artificially low to make your current owners happy. But I don't think that serves the association long term, because when you need money, you are now asking owners to front a significant amount of money, a lot of times significant amount of money, very quickly. And it can catch people off guard. People might be on limited incomes. I think it's important that you have a long-term vision of this association is going to age. We are going to have retaining wall issues. We are going to have common element or common area maintenance issues, and we need to reserve our funds adequately. And you can do that, slowly over time to make sure that you're protected long-term, instead of running up against a short deadline. Oh my God, we need $800,000 right now, and we only have 60 owners. And we have to levy a special assessment. What do we do? And then you have to go through the whole process at that point too, of usually hiring an attorney. So you have to spend money on that to make sure that you have the authority to get the money for the thing it is that you want to do. And then, have you done it properly? Have you voted on this special assessment? Have you given the owners notice of it? Have you followed your governing documents? Have you followed Chapter 209? Have you followed Chapter 82? You could have avoided all of that had you made sure that you levied your assessments accordingly with your reserve study or whatever else it is that you can anticipate that work needed to be done. I authored a quick white paper on when disaster strikes, what every association needs to know about levying special assessments and funding loans, because that is happening. We've got there's a lot of aging condo associations. And sometimes insurance does not cover everything that you need to have covered and paid for, and the association has to come up with a lot of money very quickly.
Yeah. So boards that are not looking forward and considering the future impact of how they are budgeting, how they are doing reserve studies, how they might even be doing moderate special assessments when needed, and it can build up, and in the future end up in situations where you can have massive special assessments. I'd argue, by the way, that I think that this is not just a legal consideration, or an operational consideration, but there's a moral consideration here, that for a newer community, that is not properly budgeting, let's say, their reserves down the road, then you're disproportionately putting the burden of those reserves on future homeowners. And you might be thinking, hey, I'm going to live here for 5 to 10 years, and I'll let those homeowners who live here 15, 20 years from now have to deal with this. I think that there's an obligation to appropriately budget and to appropriately fund the reserves throughout the course of a building's or a community's life, and spread that cost out in an appropriate way. Not to mention, by the way, that can ultimately impact the values of homes down the road.
Yeah, and then when people go to sell their unit, they have to disclose that there's a special assessment of $30,000 or $40,000 that has to be met or something like that when they go to sell the unit because they can't pay it or they don't want to pay it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Creates problems. It could have been avoided.
Yeah, I think that the opposite side of that blunder, if you will, is we want to see boards that are forward thinking, making appropriate decisions, considering not only what's happening right now, but what's going to be the impact down the road for the association. So, Kate, thank you so much for taking the time to have this discussion. I hope that is helpful for our viewers and those who watch this episode. And I would encourage you to check out other episodes of The Uncommon Area. Both Kate and I will obviously be around here for a bit tonight, but wanted to just give a couple of minutes. Does anybody have any? I don't expect you necessarily do, but anybody have any specific questions about anything that we talked about tonight? Does the concern about board members making mistakes in what they put in email also apply to other forms of writing, whether it be social media or text messages and so forth?
If you have an association Facebook page and you're posting something on Facebook, a homeowner has that. They're going to do a screen grab of it. And I'm not saying don't communicate with homeowners. It's absolutely super necessary to communicate with homeowners because a lot of their big complaints come from when you aren't communicating with them, they don't know what's going on, and then they feel like they need to make a request to inspect the books and records of the association. I'm just saying, be careful. But also, if you are doing something via unanimous written consent, you have to have it in writing, and email is considered to be a writing. If you have text messages get lost, board members move, unfortunately, some people pass away, and then you have no record of how a vote occurred. And, so you want to make sure you have everything documented that you need to have documented, but not necessarily airing the board's dirty laundry on a Facebook page. That's another question I get sometimes is you've got one board member who goes to the board meeting and then turns around and will go on Facebook and say, I feel I need to let you know the board acted this way at the meeting. And I think that they are, they're possibly breaching their duty of loyalty.
Any other questions? Yeah, so the question is, despite sending lots and lots of information to homeowners, they very rarely read the communication being sent from the board or from the management company. And are there other ways to approach that? My answer would be a repetition in the form of the communication. I think we have found there to be success in sending out the same messaging by email, social media, text messaging, and repeating it in different forms. We want people to be able to access information in the medium that they are most used to doing that in other parts of life. So that would be one element. Second, I would just say keeping things short. A lot of people never read past the first paragraph of anything that you send them. And that would also include keeping things that are most important at the top. So these are things that I think are commonly applied in a lot of other environments. The town hall meetings for big topics, you might say, hey, nobody will show up. But I've seen associations where they make a town hall meeting also a social event. And they will cater something. They will find something else to bring people in. They'll tie in a presentation that will communicate along those lines. And then the last thing I would say at Action, we've actually built out a studio in our office, and that's what we use for communicating. Through normally it's where we do our podcasts and other video messaging. But how I communicate out to our team, which are in now a couple hundred different locations. I have team members. I'll make video messages on a regular basis where I'm sending that out in addition to what's going out by email or other means. And so again, I see boards that are willing to find a variety of different mediums through which to communicate and to keep it short and to keep the most important stuff first. I think that's what I've seen that is helpful.
Yeah, I would completely agree. Short, simple, to the point. We have a very good on-the-go society. I think when I send an email, I just assume whoever's reading my email is reading it while they're on their phone doing something else too. I highlight action, but I mean, that might not make sense for a corporate, HOA email that comes out to have highlighted action items. But the next board meeting is at so-and-so, and then you big bold print the important stuff. And then if they want to read the fine print, they can. And then the other one is you just threaten to levy a special assessment, and then they'll keep reading. Then they'll keep reading it at the bottom. You go, just kidding.
That works. And you have the challenge of effective communication in a 3,000 home master plan community is much more difficult than in a high-rise environment. For the high-rises, I've seen some creative approaches in the communication there where there's something very specific that you want to communicate. I've had the front desk staff trained that everybody who comes through, there's a conversation that they'll say, are you aware of, and they have a bullet point or two that the front desk staff will communicate in addition to email communication or website. And I've even seen a case where there was I don't remember what they printed it on, but basically it was a 3x5 size type of a handout. And everybody that came through the lobby, if they were a homeowner, the front desk staff would say, hey, are you aware of, and just hand this out. And it's just another way of reaching homeowners as they come through. And again, in a high rise where you have a lobby and people are walking through regularly, I would say take advantage of where you have that type of intimacy. Again, these master plan communities, the large scale communities, a lot more difficult to communicate in those environments. And so that's where the social media, the videos, the emails, the text messages, all of that becomes really, really important.
The sign on the stake at the front guard gate. That is I always read those, or the things that are posted in the elevator. I read those as well because you're sitting in the elevator.
Yeah, absolutely. So. Well, hey, I appreciate everybody being part of this episode, and enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.